people started to worry about TikTok as like a propaganda mechanism, we started to hear security officers say, now I'm kind of worried about these AI apps the other way, telling my employees to do harmful things. We went and built a system to help people with all of that. So what if we gave you something you could connect to your network, it sees what your employees are doing, it's sort of like invisible training wheels for them, silently redacts sensitive data so they get answers but they don't lose data. And then when you turn on your own AI, like we'll do all the protection and the typical security stuff, but what if we help you do this stuff safely?
In this episode of Inside the Silicon Mind, we're excited to welcome Rick Caccia, a security and compliance leader who's driven product successes at Palo Alto Networks, Google, and Symantec. With over 2 decades in cybersecurity, Rick has taken companies from IPO milestones like ArcSight to building market-defining strategies as the first CMO at Exaby. He brings deep expertise from launching groundbreaking security products and leading marketing at some of the industry's biggest names. In this episode, we explore Rick's playbook for scaling cybersecurity companies, building products customers love, and navigating an ever-changing threat landscape. What would you say are the main reasons startups fail?
They built a product for a market that doesn't exist. A startup is like you're on a surfboard out in the ocean and you're paddling, waiting to catch a wave. And a bad startup is the wave never comes.
Rick, you see multiple tech waves. What's new about AI security?
Yeah, it's a good question. I think to answer that, let's take a step back first and say what's different about AI versus some of the earlier tech waves we see. So we've had some pretty big ones in the last 20 years, right? We've had cloud, we've had mobile, both very interesting, but different than AI. And I've been around long enough to have started my career in product management in the early .com times, right? So a long time ago. To me, when I look at AI, the thing it most resembles as a tech wave is the web phase, is web, more than anything else. And why is that? Well, web was interesting because the tech came along and it unleashed all these interesting behaviors. But at the time, most of the businesses that bought and deployed this stuff had really only vague ideas of like what they were actually going to do with it. And I say this because I was a product manager at the time in the late 90s for a startup that had the patent to connect a database to a web page, which, now is sort of like the most fundamental thing of you use a web app. We would go around and we'd talk to these companies and say, well, you can connect your web pages to your databases. And they would literally say things like, well, why would I want to do that? And you'd say, well, you could make an online store, people could order stuff, or you could make a bank, an online bank, and they could check their balances. And like people go, well, they just go to the ATM or they just go to the store I built. Like, why would they do this in a browser? And you think now you're like, it's just ridiculous. And I think we're going to see the AI version of that, not too far from now. So, back then, I think that the tech departments at these companies were more forward thinking than the businesses. I remember being told by a CIO, hey, we're way ahead of our own business units. He was a CIO at this bank in the Midwest. He's like, we're way ahead of the business. We tell the business what they can do and what kind of new businesses they can offer because they can't conceive of what our technology, this web technology, will let them do, which is pretty mind-blowing. And, I think tech buyers today are more forward-thinking. There are definitely going to be things we see soon with AI that seem super, super obvious that today no one's really seen. So, if the question is what's different about AI security, and then if what's different with AI, well, enterprise AI is something like that, right? There's lots of experiments, there's lots of confusion and concern. There's this excitement about there's always going to be this interesting productivity, but no one really quite is sure how it's going to happen yet. And it's super, super early. So let me give you an example. We met a few months, end of 24, I met with the CIO of one of the biggest investment banks. We had this dinner, a group of us. And we asked her, we said, how many AI projects does the bank have right now? And she said, 500 going on internally. They said, how many are in beta? 13. How many will be in production by the end of next year, 2025? This was last year. And their answer was 0. So, you think about that and say, people are excited. There's something big here. There's a big, massive change, but it's so early and no one really knows like what it is. So in the same way like web was, AI promises to be massively more productive, but you don't really know how it's going to be used, and whether companies want to use it or not, they don't really know how it's going to go. I think unlike these earlier waves, AI is much harder to predict, and it's not just where the market's going to go, but the usage itself. A large language model is not a database. You can't predict how the answers are going to go. not always going to get the same answer. It evolves and learns and so forth. And that's all before we even get like to agents. I'm just talking about how people are using chat apps and so forth. So all that is a way to say, how does AI security change and how it's different? Well, let's take my web example. You had web apps, you had web, then you had web attacks. And so that spawned this massive firewall industry, right? Hundreds of billions of dollars. Then there was a significant change when everything started flowing through port 80, and you had to make these next-gen firewalls that understood content. The sort of old static security models where you'd say, well, this is over port 80, this isn't, let's block based on that. That didn't work anymore. And I think the same kind of thing with AI, you say, well, if a model isn't a database and a conversation isn't a SQL query, then how do you protect information? How do you know whether you're leaking data? How do you know whether you're leaking proprietary methods? You don't really worry about a database, on a web page telling random employees to do something illegal or harmful, but you're already seeing that kind of stuff happen with AI. So security around AI is kind of a weird thing. The existing technology with all the companies we talk to just doesn't quite work for them. I'll give you an example. You talk to companies and they say, well, I have this secure proxy and it has a DLP, a data loss prevention module on it. And that's great. But all it really can do is tell me if like some keywords are in a prompt and it blocks them. It doesn't tell me what was happening in the prompt. It doesn't tell me if there's something bigger going on. One of the pharma CIOs told me, he said, look, we have that stuff, but a lot of our proprietary intellectual property are the methods we use to do drug discovery. Like you can't use a regular expression in a DLP model to determine whether like our drug discovery methods are being leaked. And the way they get leaked is we have these summer PhD interns come in and before meetings, they upload all our internal research and they ask ChatGPT to summarize it. And now we're kind of screwed because maybe our data has leaked out. So you've got to think about AI less as this static source of data where you can ask questions and get answers and more like a very smart, clever partner who can tell you really interesting things. And so you have to figure out how on earth do I secure that? How do I secure my information? How do I secure my methods? The methods we have historically weren't that great, but they don't work at all in the AI world. So like one thing that works really well that we're playing with that we think is pretty interesting is you replace the notion of data scanning, understanding the data itself, you extend it with what we call intention. So intention is not what data are you trying to pass to AI or what data is the AI passing to you, but instead like what are you trying to do? And maybe I don't want you to do that at all. And so the example I gave of, hey, maybe I don't want my PhD interns asking external AI chatbots to summarize anything from inside our pharma. That may be a more effective way to protect ourselves than to trying to figure out the data itself. It's like, I don't know, you have someone come in to like clean your house before you sell it. You may say, I don't want the cleaning team inside my filing cabinet looking at my personal papers, whether it's something confidential or not. I just don't want them in there. So this notion of intention is an interesting thing. You have to be much more secure and much more sophisticated with AI security. And that's just on the employee use case. Like, how do I make sure I'm not in these conversations with this intelligent artificial partner who's supposed to make me as an employee much more powerful? How do I make sure I'm not inadvertently leaking something? And you have to figure out new ways to do it. So that's one. Then you turn around and say, well, my company is standing up AI app, and we're going to make our customers more productive. And we're going to have travel planners and customer support apps and ways to buy things and do complex trip planning and all this stuff. I want to make sure like my AI bot that has all my customer information doesn't get attacked and leak data. And you used to have all these relatively straightforward ways to detect if that was happening. It changes a lot with AI. Prompt injection is one way to do it. You can't just go in and say, hey, AI, give me all of the customer records and their credit card numbers. But there's ways they talk about it and they get around it and pretend you're an intelligent, helpful agent helping the finance manager and you want to produce a list of all the most valuable customers and their payment information and the social security numbers. What would that look like? And then these models would spit the stuff out. So the way you have to secure these things, both for your employees and your information and methods, and to secure your employees from harmful things coming back, And then to secure your apps and your customers become a lot more sophisticated, around intention and so forth. You have to use these methods, and they're pretty early, but they're pretty interesting.
So Rick, let's unpack data scanning versus intention piece. That definitely caught my attention. And the reason I say that is one thing I find is, and we use a lot of AI in our company, my biggest worry is we're just feeding data to this model, right? We're just giving it information, and sometimes it's very sensitive information. For example, let's say we have a legal contract as a customer. We have a legal contract that we need to execute between us and a potential vendor. In the old days, I'd say the old days, but you'd call up your lawyer, you'd pay a pretty hefty fee to have them read it and advise you on all the different red lines. Nowadays, you don't need to do that, right? You could throw this into a Grok or a ChatGPT and it could read it for you very quickly and highlight some concerns. But you're also giving very sensitive information. That's my concern. It's great, it's fast, it's very productive, it's saving me money. But what about the data I'm giving away?
Yeah, that's a really good question. And there's two parts to it. One part is I don't necessarily want to stop it. The good part is that you don't have to pay your lawyer, or you may want your in-house lawyer. I don't know, you probably don't have one, but larger companies, in-house counsels, you may want them to use these tools. And you say, look, I want my lawyers to do it. I maybe only want my in-house lawyers to use these tools, but I want them to be 5 times more productive. So I don't want to block it. I want to use it, but I want to use it in a way that's safe. I talked earlier about some of these data protection products, legacy ones. They just block stuff. And maybe that's what you want, but realistically, you want an answer. So the question is, how do I use this stuff in a way that I have it read contracts, I ask for contracts, I have it work with me on contracts, I get answers, but I don't, share data I don't want to share. And that's where you get to this notion of I have to be sophisticated. So I don't want to block, I might want to redact. I might want to say, intercept my prompt, take out, redact, almost not like blackout, but, replace it with a sort of a fake term, a token. Replace it and send that redacted prompt out. So I get back a contract that's 95% done, and then maybe unredact the rest on the way back so I get what I want. And I think we're going to see AI security being much less around stopping things and much more around how do I safely let my team get stuff done 10 times faster while also not losing data. So in your case, use the tools, use it safely. How do I do that? That's, I think, the question.
Slightly digressing, but this whole AI wave that we're going through, is this an architectural shift, or is it more of an application layer change?
I think at first it's going to be more of an application layer change, is what we're seeing. Not clear how the architectures will be fully different. I think we've seen, even in a short amount of time, some interesting evolution at the app layer. First phase was standalone AI app, right? You go to ChatGPT, type stuff in, you get it back. Fine. That's got its own, and that works within your existing network architecture, right? You're not getting a different browser. You're using the browser you have. You're using it at work. You're using it through your firewall. That's actually not that hard to secure at one level. You might want to be able to do the things I've talked about, but it's there. The level we're running into now at the architecture layer, the application layer, is not standalone AI. It's AI embedded in the apps you have. It's Einstein having AI inside of Salesforce. It's AI inside of Grammarly. I'm not going to an AI app. I'm using all the apps I use. They're just AI enabled now. They can get to my data and do things with it and do all the sort of things we talked about a few minutes ago, but it's hard for me to block that. So you're seeing that at the application layer. Where you're going to see the architecture change, I think, is with agentic computing. Right now, you see it as, hey, these bigger apps are adding agents and they get work done for you. One of the things we're sort of concerned about is when you start to see MCP servers inside of Windows, and every desktop can run an agent, and that agent has access to your local data. You're just sort of opening up some of the old Windows kind of attack surfaces up again. And I think that's where you're going to start to see some architectural changes. You're going to figure out, how do I actually deploy these agents in a way that they don't blow holes in the side of my network from a security perspective? And that hasn't started yet. People haven't quite figured that out yet, but it's definitely coming.
Rick, what's actually different about this AI security piece? If you were really to summarize how you're tackling it, how WitnessAI as a company, we'll get to the product and what you're building, which I'm really keen to unpack. But what is actually different about AI security versus previous waves that we've had?
Yeah. A couple of things. So AI is going to be everywhere. In the same way today, web is everywhere. 20 years ago, 25 years ago, web was this separate thing. Today, web is so everywhere, internet connectivity, like we never even think about it. AI is very much going down that path now. It's going to be everywhere. So one part of security is you need to be able to intercept, get visibility to, and apply security policy and controls everywhere. And today, people don't know how to do that. Second, it's much more sophisticated and flexible. And the old methods of securing information aren't going to work. These things that these data protection products use, regular expressions like tagging stuff in your file system, doesn't work. So I think this notion of intention is a way to go. The third thing is, this is more of an extreme, is I think we're going to run into crazy situations around data sovereignty, control sovereignty. This stuff is so sensitive. Companies see AI use as so sensitive, and given some of the things we're seeing in the world, this notion of my internal AI data and internal AI use and my customer use of our internal AI, the regulatory controls around that are already starting and they're going to be crazy. So you need to be able to control that in a sophisticated way. So access it everywhere, more sophisticated controls, and then being able to, while you have these sophisticated controls, make them local and regional so countries can sort of protect it and multinationals can protect it. Like those things are going to cause all kinds of trouble for AI security.
It's interesting. I think about this podcast, right? We're recording it over the web. If the web cuts off, we don't have a podcast to record. We have to do it in person. And I think about our business. It's 100% dependent on the internet. I think about if I'm traveling and I need to know how to get to a certain place, I'm pulling out my phone and I'm checking the internet. Everything's on the web. It's been a while since the last time I've actually seen cash. It's all web, right? It's all over, your internet, your bank. It's all over the web. I guess the point I'm trying to get to when I think about AI, are we going to get to an age where everything is dependent on AI? If we don't have AI around, it's like if the Wi-Fi goes down, we're in trouble.
I don't think I'm saying anything that is some big shocker here, but the expectation here is that these tools are super powerful. I mean, look, inside of Witness, we use a lot of these tools. The coding tools with AI are crazy how productive they are. It's easily 10x more productive when your developers use it. And you can imagine that stuff everywhere. And eventually it just disappears. And so I think it's going to be everywhere. It's funny you ask about web. It's funny when I was saying that I'm going down to my office. I told my wife to record this podcast. She goes, "Oh, I thought you'd be going into a studio." I'm like, studio? People have studios anymore? Everything's on the web. And I'm sure there'll be a point not too far down the road where the notion of, AI enhanced work is just, it won't be separate, right? It won't be like it used to be where you have like brick and mortar and e-commerce. There's just commerce. And you'll have the same thing with sort of knowledge work. There won't be, AI knowledge work and non-AI work. It's just work. I think those things will be coming. So we probably need to learn the lessons of some of the past waves and get it right now, from a security perspective and a control perspective, or else it's going to be tough to clean up later.
Rick, I'd like to talk about WitnessAI. As far as the company is concerned, let's start from the beginning, the problem statement. Talk to me about that.
So when we started, we had the notion that the typical security notion. My co-founder and I looked at this and we said, well, people are going to stand up all these AI apps. They're going to get attacked by evil AI. We'll build an AI system to protect your AI from their AI. And we talked to couple dozen chief information security officers, and they all said, yeah, I could not care less about that. Like, don't care. That sounds like a great future scary scenario, but today that's not the problem I have. Today the problem I have is all my employees hear about these amazing AI apps, and there are like literally thousands of these things, available. We don't know where people are going to use them. We don't know what they're doing within there. We don't know with best intention if they're sharing data, customer data, source code, proprietary methods. In the second year, when people started to worry about TikTok as like a propaganda mechanism, we started to hear security officers say, now I'm kind of worried about these AI apps the other way, telling my employees to do harmful things. So we went and built a system to help people with all of that. We said, well, what if we gave you something you could connect to your network? It sees what your employees are doing. It's sort of like invisible training wheels for them, or guardrails, bumpers in a bowling alley. It shows you where they're going, shows you what they're doing, lets them get their work done, silently redacts sensitive data so they get answers, but they don't lose data, protects sort of external apps from telling you harmful things. And then when you turn on your own AI, like we'll do all the protection and the typical security stuff, but what if we help you do this stuff safely? And the response has been great. Like customers love it. 3 weeks ago, we turned on 150,000 employees in 10 days at one of the biggest telcos in the world. The CISO told the board, no witness, no AI. And now they turned off a bunch of their firewall rules blocking this stuff, and they can use this stuff. So we built something to help people adopt it safely. I've been in security a long time. I don't like the scary security FUD. And our view here is this stuff is like magic. You should be able to use it. We want to build tools to help people adopt this stuff safely.
So let's say I'm a bank. I come to you to buy your product. How does it solve my problem? How does it sit into my infrastructure?
Yeah. In fact, my first customer was a bank, is a bank. So they hooked it up. They have a network proxy. We have a set of these cloud services. We pop it into a private cloud for them, in this case on AWS, VPC. We connect it to their network, their proxy. In their case, it was Zscaler. And they turned it on. It was funny. They turned it on for about 2% of their employees. In the first week, the CISO said, I found 2 potential class action suits that you prevented. People are like, with best intention, employees were uploading all kinds of crazy stuff they shouldn't have. I mean, just think about it. You tell people, hey, this stuff is magic. It'll help you, do analysis. So then a marketing person is like, well, let me upload the whole customer database and ask ChatGPT to find the best people to target, with the sales campaign. And of course, they uploaded like Social Security, all kinds of stuff, credit card numbers, stuff that shouldn't be there. So if you're a bank, the first thing you do is you turn it on, and they saw all kinds of risky, non-acceptable use of this AI. Then once they could see it, they could do some training. Then they could turn on some of our policy controls so we could block that stuff. They saw their developers were like sharing code, hey, optimize this code. And they're like, that's proprietary code. Don't send it out. So we could intercept it and route it to an internal model silently so the developer gets the optimization, but the code doesn't leak out. So, the banks are kind of like any other customer. Like they're regulated. They have a lot of sensitive customer data. They have employees who want to do their jobs better when they handle that data. And they're using AI, and we have to stop them from using it in a risky way with best intentions.
I'm just thinking about something that I struggle with every day is how do we become more productive at work, right? With all this productivity apps that we have now, we're able to do things a lot faster than we were doing prior, before this technology was available. And now I'm just thinking, how can we do it even faster? How can we become more productive? And then you've got this other issue with all these different, as you said earlier on, there's so many out there now. It's also very difficult to ascertain which ones you can trust and which ones you potentially can't trust. Are you saying, Rick, that with WitnessAI, if I was your customer, I can safeguard that risk of my employees potentially giving out sensitive data to all these different AI products that are out there? They can still be productive, which is what you said. You still want them to be productive. You still want them to use the technology, but just use it safely.
Yeah, absolutely. So it kind of goes in this progression. The first is we'll say, here are all the AI apps or embedded AI apps your employees are using. Here's a list of them. It's always 5 or 10 times more than the company thinks employees are using. And then we have all this metadata about them. So we can say, look, these are the ones that are risky. They'll typically come back, go, DeepSeek, is it in my network? We go, yeah, here it is. Here are the people that are using it. Push a button, block it. But here are some others that we think are risky that people are using. Do you want to block those entirely? Okay, these let's block. Here are some that aren't risky, but could be used in risky ways. So let's allow it. But here are some policies around data sharing that we can implement. So when people use it, we let them share data safely, redact stuff, that sort of thing. So yeah, you get to use this stuff safely, and it's generally not an on-off. It's like a couple of different progression levels.
Right. So it's basically you choose what level of security you want, how much. You've got the control around the policies you can create.
On a per app group, per person, identity kind of basis. So you might say, my legal department can use Gemini to write contracts, redact out any customer PII. No one but legal is allowed to use any AI apps to write any contract. This group of developers can use Cursor to write code, but intercept the prompts coming out of Cursor and route it to a different backend model. No one can share any customer PII with any third-party apps. Like, you do all those kinds of things, and it works really well. It's one of those where the legal departments write these acceptable use policies, and then they sort of dump it on the IT department to figure out how the heck to implement this stuff. And that's where that's where we help them, give them tools to implement the stuff their privacy and legal teams come up with.
That's pretty cool. I think it's a little bit like when I think about the way our systems are built, our company, things like Kanji and CrowdStrike and Mimecast, you create all these different layers of policies depending on the user and the group within the company. This is great, but there's another killer question I have for you, right? So you've scaled, what was it? The number was 150,000 users in 10 days. That's a huge feat, right?
Yeah.
And that's a big success. Tell me about how you were able to do that so quickly.
Yeah. So that was just at one company. And we're an early company, early startup. So one of the things, there's the cliche about the dog that caught the car, the dog chases the car and then it catches it. What the heck do you do? And then, so, I go back a few months and the team at Witness, we were starting to sell into fairly large customers. And we started thinking, this is all great, chest beating, awesome to have these big customers. How are we going to deploy them, right? Because these companies are global. They have tens of thousands of employees. They work 24/7. They're in different countries. With this particular one I talked about, it was interesting. We turned them on 50,000 users at a time. We learned some interesting things. So the deployment is usually pretty easy. We say, we hook up to your proxy. We hook up to your identity system to get all your users and roles. You can set your policies, and then, we start collecting the data and show you what people are doing. Then we found, with that first big customer deployment, all their business units had slightly different identity systems. So when you collect about all the employees, it looks like gibberish when you put it together. Oops. Okay, so we need to build some back-end little AI to harmonize that. That took a couple of days. But, then you do it, it works. You build in some new GUIs to figure those things out. And if you've built a system that can scale, which we have, you built a system that's simple, which we have, then you can go to a global 150,000 employee company and turn them on in 2 weeks.
That's pretty cool. I asked that because I'm just thinking also, that's a big number. I'm assuming for a much smaller number, 20,000, 30,000, you would be able to do it a lot faster than that.
Actually, not super different, right? Like 10,000 or 100,000, it's more connecting to their systems. The volume, turns out, isn't the hard part.
Right. So if we think about connecting to their systems, are you connecting to, and sorry if I'm not thinking about this correctly, so correct me if I'm wrong. Like if I think about our infrastructure, we have Okta, we have Kanji. What are you actually plugging into?
Two things. So one is required and one is optional. The required piece is some sort of identity system. If you think about the way you employ policy around use, it's a combo of identity and intention. So, I need to know what group you're in. I need to know what you want to do. So I need an identity system. So if you have Okta, we connect to Okta. That's trivial. Larger companies have some sort of network proxy, right? Zscaler, Palo, Cisco, Bluecoat, Netscope. If you have one of those, we have it, we plug in. If you don't, we have something called Witness Anywhere that just, you don't even need it at all. And then you connect those two and, that's it. I don't push anything down to the endpoint, and we start collecting it at the network layer and see the traffic and sort of construct the reports for the customer.
Right. So, and you're absolutely right. Our systems aren't as complex as a company that has Zscaler or Cisco, et cetera. We have identity products like Okta, like Kanji, et cetera. But there are also companies that don't have that level of complexity. Right? Can you sell to them?
We can. We have a way to add users and so forth into Witness. For us, we found, just as a company, we tend to target the larger companies. We've built something for larger enterprises. For smaller ones, we've started working with managed service providers, and so they manage it. Some of the POCs we had customers try with like 50 employees, and they just load a file in, or connect to Active Directory or something. So that's certainly doable.
Going back to the very beginning of our conversation, we talked about how this is quite similar to the web era, right? When you think about security teams today, what would you say they must unlearn from that playbook of the past, whether it's the cloud playbook or the mobile playbook, to be more prepared for what's to come?
Yeah, the biggest change, that's an interesting one. The biggest change, the unlearning, it's a good way to put it. The unlearning is security is historically the department of no, right? Security generally exists to stop people from doing things. Don't go to that website. It's unacceptable. Don't click on that link. You're going to get ransomware. Don't email a file of customer records to your home Gmail. Like there's a lot of don't in security. The biggest unlearning happening now is when you talk to a CISO, they say, I can't be Mr. No or Mrs. No anymore. I have to be like Dr. Yes. That mindset and all the things that come with it is what I think AI is forcing security teams to unlearn and to do is like, how do I enable people, not how do I stop people? It's an interesting mindset. And I think the other change that comes with it is that makes security sort of part of the larger business win and helps them. Think about it this way. If a CEO says, hey, if my employees are AI enabled, we will be more competitive in the market because we're more productive and nimble. CIO and CISO go figure out how to make this happen. And they can't just say no, they have to say yes. And so by doing that, they're sort of now part of the, how do we make the business better? And I think that's a little different from how a lot of companies have typically thought about cybersecurity internally.
That's interesting. So you're saying that this unlearning piece is around changing the mindset from a no to the yes and figuring out how you're going to do it. This is why products like WitnessAI are now important. These CISOs are coming to you and saying, my CEO needs me to do this. I need to be a yes man now to make the staff more productive, protect us.
Yes. So mindset change, which leads to process change. We have to have a nimble process to add access to new apps. I have to have a more flexible process so people aren't blocked and they can get answers. We have an AI governance council and security sits on that, and it needs to participate in these projects, not block them. That mindset change leading to process change leads to technology change, which is, okay, given those first two things, what new technologies and what old technologies can we repurpose to make this stuff happen? And it's cool. I mean, I've been working with CISOs and security departments as customers for 20 years, and it's really cool to watch how the really smart ones are adapting. Like, it's pretty interesting to watch.
So what you're saying is over the last 20 years, you've seen this shift happen right before your eyes in terms of the products you were selling before and how they think about AI now.
I would say the last year versus the last 20 years. Like, you've seen the shift in the last year. Yet the AI shift is pushed. It's like nothing I've seen before. The closest, like I said, was sort of web, when people are like, oh, this is amazing. Let's redo everything so that we can go on the web to customers. And you're seeing that now, like, how do we redo everything so our employees and customers can use AI in our organization? And it's just driving a lot of mindset and process, and then sort of behind that, technology change.
I mean, we've discussed now how AI and AI security, how different is it or how indifferent is it to the past? But how has building companies changed?
So this is my 8th startup. My wife was in 5, so between us, 13. This is my first one as a CEO and co-founder, and so I think it's changed in a few ways. So the first one is things move a lot faster than they used to. So my first startup was an enterprise software company like I have today. We sold server software. This was a long time ago. Software was shipped on printed CDs back then. Like, you would literally have a CD made with artwork, and you'd have to go to like one of these CD houses. They would burn your software onto a CD because companies didn't have the network bandwidth, to like, you didn't push 10 gig things over the web to companies then. So you'd have to, there's just a little example, but you'd have to have like CDs burned and shipped back. So when you had a software release, you had to wait an extra month to get these things burned. We had one release where like we ordered thousands of these CDs to be sent to companies, and while they were being shipped back, we had to do an update, a patch to the software. And so we had to throw the CDs away and have them reburned. Like, it's just an example of just took longer to do everything. It took longer to build sales. And you didn't do everything. You didn't have product-led growth. You didn't have a lot of self-service when I started. So it just took longer to build the things, and the valuations showed that. I mean, the valuations of startups back then tended to be much smaller, and they're bigger now. Second, I would say it's not local. Startups are different in that they're not local. When I live in Silicon Valley. I'm born and raised here. The startups I worked with are all here. I would say for most of my career, startups were generally in one place. So it was harder to build a distributed company. Witness, we're half and half. So half the company is in the Bay Area, half is not, spread around the US, and then we have a team internationally. It makes recruiting different because you can hire people you wouldn't have been able to get in the past for your startup, for building your company. You can get better people who are more targeted to your problem and not just, who happens to live within 20 miles of San Jose. You also have to, with that, you have to change the way you manage because, you can't get everybody together for beers on Friday. So a lot of things are different there when it becomes not local. I would say the other thing is branding matters much more now. I feel like earlier in my career, my earlier startups, like say the first 4 of the 8, there were fewer of them. There were fewer competitors. If you were a startup, you might have 3 competitors or 5 competitors. Now you have, I don't know, there's segments where startups have 20 or 30 competitors. So branding matters. You have to stand out more. It's harder to do that. So certainly in every new little security segment, it seems like you look and there's 25, startups there. As a CEO, it's not just building engineering and sales. You have to build the brand, build marketing. I'm a former chief marketing officer, so I would get called often by VCs or recruiters, hey, come in and help the CEO out. And you'd find that you'd have like a tech founder running a startup and they couldn't figure out the marketing, couldn't build the brand, didn't know how to troubleshoot it. Like you just can't get away with that anymore. So you have to understand how to build the brand and how to build marketing. Tied to that, I would say metrics matter much more broadly now. Going from the former point, biggest difference now versus 10 or 15 years ago in my career is that everything is metrics driven now. When I started, you'd have these marketing VPs go to market at a company and their background was like picking colors and logos, right? Designing the logo. And that those people are gone. They're dinosaurs that went a long way. Everything is instrumented, including marketing. So, engineering knows bug count, code, pay, all the stuff, check-ins, all that stuff. Support knows cases, sales knows pipeline. Marketing has to have the same level of metrics and instrumentation. So a startup today, if you don't have good metrics built in all the way across, you're going to just get killed by somebody who does. And then I would say the final one, is that 1, 2, 3, 4, the fifth one is you're expected to grow much larger in your startup today. Like everything is more extreme. You can get more funding more easily. You grow your revenue faster and larger. You see these companies, I was on the exec team of a company we took public in 2008. We had 60 million in revenue. Now that's like, that company, startup with 60 million in revenue is like a couple of years away from an IPO. So just the extremes are there. You're expected to grow bigger. You can often take more money, much higher market cap. You have these multi-billion, what do they call them, decacorns, multi-billion dollar, $10 billion plus companies. So that's changed. So if you put it all together, I'd say each of those things, like the startups grow faster, move faster, all the extremes are amplified. And, if you're going to start one, you have to either do that or fail and be left behind.
What hasn't changed?
That's a good question. So what hasn't changed? You still have to pick a real problem people care about. You still have to convince buyers it is a real problem and they can't. So remember, I sell enterprise software, so I'm talking selling to businesses, not to consumers. I don't know anything about that. Enterprises, you still have to convince your buyer that the thing you're trying to fix exists. You can't solve it with the stuff they already have. And the world still doesn't want startups to exist, right? Existing big companies don't want startups to exist because you could potentially hurt them. So you have to solve a real problem. You have to convince buyers you're solving a real problem. You have to convince them they can't solve it with what they have. You have to build a product that is significantly better than what else exists. You have to build a team of strong people who work well together. And you would be amazed how often that is a problem with companies. All those things still exist. Working on Zoom doesn't fix that. Basecamp doesn't fix that. Like you just find a problem, build a solution, and build a team that can do it and grow. It will always be the same.
Rick, you've had 8 startups. This is the 8th one. And you've been in the Valley your entire career. What would you say has been the most challenging aspect or part of building a startup?
The most challenging one is, think of it this way, like something like 8 or 9 out of 10 startups die. They don't succeed. My wife, I said we have 13 of them. Like we're sort of lunatics out on the end of the curve, right? Most people do 1, 9 out of 10 chance it's going to fail. Maybe they do 2, 9 out of 10 chance it fails. They give up and go work at Oracle or something like that. So few people kind of do a lot of them. We did. It worked out pretty well. Had a bunch of successes. The biggest frustrating thing is it is highly likely you will work at a startup and spend multiple years working very long weeks and burn years of your life, and it will fail. Internally in Witness, there was this period we were having so many customer requests, and the engineering team was working around the clock, and I would tell them, guys, I know this is stressful, but this is good. There's nothing worse than working all of these hours to build something that nobody cares about and nobody wants. It is the most frustrating thing. And I've been in a couple of those, and you're there 7 days a week, and eventually it just dies because you built something that nobody wants. And so I tell the team, like the fact that people want this and are giving you feature requests and finding bugs is awesome. It means people want what you're building. And I think over time, I like to think you get better at finding those. And it's really frustrating when you spend, I think, 3 of those in a row that didn't go anywhere. So that's like, 6 years of your life that was basically just thrown away. And that is one of the most frustrating things. I mean, it's probably different than you could probably say, well, if you work in a big company, it's maybe kind of boring and you're also sort of burning away years of your life there. But, when a startup goes nowhere and dies, it's a unique pain and frustration.
But I assume you don't have any regrets about those failures. You learned so much from those failures.
If I were to be given those same company opportunities today, I wouldn't have done them. I've learned enough that I would have learned how to pass on them. But you do learn in all of them, and the successes kind of wipe out the failures. And interesting, I would say the most frustrating places to work at are the ones that were the most memorable and where I still talk to the people. Like, I think the ones that are frustrating often had the strongest cultures, and those people stay in contact with each other.
Is it, like now with AI, is it a speed of execution versus the depth of trust?
Well, sorry, do you mean inside the company or in the market?
In the market, I mean, there's this need to go really fast to get the product built, to get it out there, to win quicker. As you said, companies are getting to, I've heard some stories in the past few weeks of companies getting to 50, 80 million in ARR, and there's 4 or 5 developers in a company, and they've done it in 8 months. Like, things are moving at such a fast rate now, which is exciting. And as you said, valuations are bigger than they were before from the CD time, which I remember, by the way. That's the time that I do remember. Everything was in a CD, and you could imagine how that process is now. Thinking about it, as you say, and shipping that product, it takes time. Now you can ship quicker, everything's quicker, faster. This need to be fast because everyone is going fast. The technology that's available today, you can code quicker, your developers are more productive. But how much of that is we're getting to a world where there is a lack of trust, maybe, or not necessarily a lack of trust, but a need for customers to trust what you're building?
One big difference, we've talked about a little bit about what's different in startups. Let's also talk about what's different about big tech. I would say big tech companies are much generally smarter and more agile than they used to be. They're less, in some cases, less dinosaurish than they used to be. So if you're a startup, generally speaking in B2B, the only way you survive is you have to move faster than the existing legacy companies, and you have to just build much better capabilities. So you have to do both. Like, you can't just build better, but more slowly, because they'll eventually just beat you on distribution. And you can't move fast and build like useless crap, because then you just won't sell anywhere. That's why you have 9 out of 10 of them fail. So you've got to mix the two. So you've got to move very quickly, build something super compelling. And then from the customer side, the moving quickly and building things compelling is how you build trust. We had, I told you that example where we turned on those 150,000 employees for that company. It was a hard period. It's not like we did it and flipped a switch and went to sleep. Like, the team was working night and day for 2 weeks. And then we met with their security team, and they came back with this list, pages of like the next set of things they wanted. And, they gave it to us on like a Thursday, and we met with them on the next Tuesday, and we'd already implemented half of the list by Tuesday. And we're like, well, good news. Half the stuff's already in. You just need to, update. And the other half will be in, a week from today. And that's the trust part, right? The moving fast and building what they want. That's how you earn the trust. That's how you earn the trust with your customer. Again, B2B, your buyers, right? It's not like I'm putting something on a download and I have 1 million people. I don't know who they are. Like, I know who my buyers are, both the company names and the people. Like, I know who the actual people are. And the way you build trust is you say, look, I'm going to do this a year faster than anyone else will, than your big supplier will. My stuff will have 10 times the capability that you need. And when stuff goes wrong, I'll fix it, in a day instead of 2 months.
I like how you flip that. It's the trust is born out of speed. The way the market is, the speed of the market, it needs things to be faster. As a supplier to one of your customers, they're moving fast. They need you to move fast. So that trust is built. You said, you had 8 startups, you had failure. If you used to think back and just, hindsight is 2020, what would you say are the main reasons startups fail?
There's this common answer, which is they built a product that doesn't solve a problem. But I think the way I would look at it is they built a product for a market that doesn't exist. And, I had someone once tell me that, a startup is like you're on a surfboard, you're sitting on a surfboard out in the ocean, and you're paddling, waiting to catch a wave. And a bad startup is the wave never comes. So you're just some dude sitting on a surfboard floating there, and it's not very fun. Generally, in my experience, you build a good product for a market that doesn't exist. I've seen a couple of ways in my experience that the market doesn't develop. One is you miss the market. So one startup I was at, we didn't realize it. We were building a database integration technology. It was pretty interesting. And it turned out we missed one wave without realizing it, kind of data warehousing. This is like this virtual data warehousing, data integration product. And we missed one wave, but we were too early for the next wave. And we didn't think about it that way. But we, when you look back and go, why didn't anyone want this? And the answer was they would say, well, I kind of already solved this problem. It doesn't really do it the way you say, but it's good enough that I don't really want to do anymore. And then 2 years later, people had a different flavor of it and people were selling them stuff. So one way you have a product that doesn't have a successful market is you just miss the timing, right? You're too early, you're too late, there's just no market. Sometimes, technology itself may take the market away. So I was in one startup that did kind of live push to a browser, which now sounds ridiculous, but in 2001, it wasn't ridiculous. And so people used to actually just hit refresh over and over in their browsers. Like people who are below a certain age don't realize this, but people literally just hit refresh. In eBay, you're like hitting the refresh button over and over every second to see if you want an auction. And I was in a startup and there were multiple others that built a way to do like live push to browsers. And well-funded startups, smart people, all the top VCs behind them. And then one day the HTML spec was updated, the HTTP spec was updated, and it had push included. And the entire thing sort of was wiped away by something free in the browser. Like, okay, well, that's great. That's just tech. And, so you can miss the market in different ways. But I think the way they generally fail that I've seen is you can't identify a market and get into it.
Isn't that a risk with OpenAI now? They're just watching the market. And if there's something they find fascinating and it's working, they could just build it and spin it off very quickly.
Man, I'll tell you, I don't want to speak to OpenAI. That's one where I don't feel qualified. I think it's impressive what they've done. I don't know enough about what they're doing internally to speak knowledgeably on it. But I don't know. I mean, you could just turn around, I guess, as an observer and say, Gen AI looks to be an enormous market. They're an early mover with a obviously highly adopted product, one like fastest adopted product ever. So on that basis, they clearly found a market and brought a product to it.
Everyone I speak with AI has been around for a long time, but in many ways it's OpenAI that brought it to the surface with this technology.
I mean, I was in high school writing code in Prolog, which is like this old stuff for sort of knowledge systems, and that was how they were thinking you were going to build AI. It's just crazy how amazing it is now.
No, it really is. OpenAI really has changed the game. You said earlier on that one of the reasons that startups fail is either you miss the market or you're too soon. When you first started WitnessAI, one of the first things you said you did was you spoke to a dozen different CSOs, right? How important is that early stage discovery calls? How important is it having those early stage discovery calls in figuring out whether it's worth building what you're about to build?
Well, again, I'll speak for B2B. It's probably the most important thing because you can identify your buyers, right? I mean, the Fortune 1000, there's only 1,000 of those companies. You can identify your buyers and you can go talk to potential buyers and you can figure out if you're on the mark, if you're close to the mark, if you're way off mark, you can figure those things out relatively early. Generally with B2B buyers in security, most of the ones with founders in security, most of the ones I talk to, they come out of other security companies. And so they kind of understand the problem reasonably well. And it's more like they can go to potential buyers and go, look, I think I see this problem. I think you may have this problem. I've built a solution for this problem. There's a company called Cribble that's an amazing company. It was founded by some Splunk guys and some Splunk product managers. And they knew the problem that Splunk customers have, which is people have to pay for the data they put into Splunk. And so the more data you put in, the more you pay. And a lot of that data is useless, but you don't know it till later and you've had to pay for it. And so they built this product where like, well, it controls how you manage data into Splunk. And if I describe that product to my parents, they'd be like, what the hell's that? I don't know. But, if you talk to a CIO or a CISO and you talk about managing their log data and doing that effectively and cost effectively and taking away all that stuff, we'd be like, my God, this is amazing. And, Clint's idea was amazing. So I think a lot of these founders have ideas for a real problem, and then they can go test it with often the buyers took the last product and figure out if it's a real thing.
Yeah, I mean, the reason I ask that question is because it is, I've heard it a lot, and there are also companies that have been built where I've asked the founder, how many customers did he speak with before you started the product? And they just say, none. We knew the problem existed. I'm guessing what you're referring to there is with the Cribble example, they were there and they saw it at Splunk. So they knew the problem existed.
I think that's true for a lot of things. Like I think it's less, in many cases with B2B, you know the problem exists. Question with your company is, how are you going to solve that problem? And how do you describe the problem in a clear way? So I'll give you an example. I was an early employee. I was the first CMO at a company called Exabeam. Exabeam was one of the early companies in what was called user behavior analytics. Everyone there had kind of come out of security analytics, database analytics. Everyone knew that there was this problem, which was in your security operations center, you're looking at logs to figure out if someone has had had been breached or you have some attack on your company. And everyone was like, well, these existing products called SIMs, like Splunk, there's certain things they're really bad at. Like one thing they're really bad at is hackers will take over this was, 10 years ago. Hackers will take over you as an employee, take over your account, somehow get your password, create an account or impersonate you, and move around your network stealing confidential data, which because they're impersonating you, they're allowed to go see. And then they'll do all the things that look like you, but they've stolen all your data and from the company, but it was by someone who had access to the data. So they'll impersonate a database administrator and log into all the customer and payroll databases and steal all the identity information. But if from the security org, they're like, well, how would I know this is a problem? Like security orgs know it's a problem that their employees get hacked and data gets stolen through account takeover. So they can say that's a problem. And you could probably go to any CISO 10 years ago and say, do you agree that account takeover leading to data breach is a problem? And people moving around the network taking data is a problem. They go, yeah, sure. So then the question is, can you solve it with your existing technology? And so part of that is convincing them it can't be done. Because they'll say, well, I have Splunk, I can just do it in Splunk. And then two, to say, well, the way I've done this, my solution solves that problem better than anything else. So even though I know the problem exists, I have to first get them to acknowledge that they can't solve it with what they have, and then get them to acknowledge that they can solve it with what I have. So that's where I think sort of the magic of the startup kind of works, right? Because even though you know the problem exists, it may be too early. People are worried about something else. The thing that's there is good enough that the buyer doesn't care this year. They may care next year, and you run out of money by then. Or they do it, they care, they just think your implementation sucks and there's some other company they like better. Those are the things you have to sort out, I think, from a startup perspective.
That's interesting. So it's not necessarily that the problem exists, that in most times that's obvious. It's how you solve the problem. Now, when we take that and think about the funding phase of a startup, you've had these 20, 25, 30, 50 calls, and you're pretty confident that you have a solution to this problem. When you go to pitch to VCs, if you go back to your time when you pitched to, obviously you're different. You've been in the Valley a long time. You've had multiple startups. You have a name, you have a network. But for someone new in the industry, new to starting a company, they have a problem. They're solving it. They're confident they can solve it. They've followed the playbook. They've spoken to customers. When they pitch their idea to VCs, what would you advise these founders to index on, especially when they're pre-product? They don't have a product. They just have a deck and a solid founding team.
I think some of those same things apply, right? So, if I'm looking if I would be looking, I would look at, people, product, market. So is this a real problem? First of all, you got to convince the VCs the same sort of stuff. Like, does this problem exist? Can it not be solved by existing vendors? Because if they don't think the problem exists, then why would they pay attention to you? If they think, Oracle or Google or somebody else is going to solve it, then why would they give money to your startup unless they just want you to be bought? But if they think those things exist, then they're basically saying, do I think this team has come up with a product conception that is 10 times better than everybody else? Do I conceive of the product and the problem and the product in the same way that they do? Do I think this is the team that can get it done because something's going to go wrong and they're going to have to pivot? Can they do that? And then is this market big enough to go after? Even with us, like with Witness, I definitely talked to, the Series A didn't take that long. I just talked to a handful of VCs we knew and got it done quickly. But even some of them pushed back, right? They said, well, why are you doing it this way? Why don't you build a product a different way? It would be a lot easier. And no matter how much I argued with them, they just didn't come around. Okay. Another one viewed the market very different. They carved up the market into a bunch of little sub-markets. And my take was that makes no sense. No CISO is going to buy 5 startup products, different different startups just so employees can use ChatGPT. Like your map isn't how people buy, and we're just never going to agree. So, all those things matter for everyone. You've got to go in there and convince them you found an interesting problem. You guys both have to see the problem the same way. You have to convince them why existing companies can't do it. You have to convince them why your architecture is the right architecture. You have to convince them that you and your team can do all of this. And then finally, you have to get to evaluation that makes sense. But those are the kind of things I think you need to do. And if you do those, then, you'll get funding.
Rick, it's been a pleasure having you on the show. I've learned so much. We've unpacked a lot. And I like the topics we discussed, because it's a nice view on how things have changed, how things haven't changed, both from an AI perspective in relation to security, but also in terms of building companies. Finally, my last question. I like to always have an opportunity at the very end to ask my guest for a book recommendation. The reason I do this is because I feel like this show is about learning what happens inside Silicon Valley, which is why it's called Inside the Silicon Mind. So inside your mind and inside, I guess, the many walls that you've been through building amazing companies and all the successes you've had, what book would you recommend to our listeners?
That is an easy one. So the book I would recommend is neither about startups, nor is it about Silicon Valley, but it kind of is about both. It's The Soul of a New Machine by Tracy Kidder. It's a nonfiction book. I read it when I was 13 for the first time. I think when you read it, if you're young, you're either like, this is the most horrific, you're completely horrified, or you read it and say, this is what I want to do with my life. It's a book about a computer company called Data General. It no longer exists. It was acquired by EMC, and they embarked on this crash program to build a new mini computer and kind of gain the lead in the market. And the book is basically about the process of recruiting the team, conceiving of the product, building the product, and taking it. And it's basically like it's a nonfiction book. It won a Pulitzer Prize. It's amazingly written. And it's basically a book about building teams and building products, even though it's about neither of those. Very interesting. It's you read it and figure out how this company built a team and things they went through and how they built the culture. And it's just an unbelievably great book. I think if you want to think about how you build a company and a team and how you structure it and what you do, it's an amazing book to read. Incredibly written.
Amazing. So Soul of a New Machine, we'll put it in the show notes.
Soul of a Machine. Yeah, there were two things that came out of it, two concepts that sort of stuck with me. One, the managers of this computer division that were building this thing had to do this. They made this explicit decision. They're like, should we build with what they called kids or not? And they made a decision to build the whole thing using basically new college graduates. And their logic was like, these guys don't know what can and cannot be done and will be more creative. And I think that's an interesting concept for the Valley. And I like that because I like to always try and create bigger jobs for the team, like something that's sort of overwhelming. The second thing was they had this concept they called pinball, which is, I think it really applies to the Valley, which is, you do a project, you build a computer for the company, it's a win, and you get to play another round and you get to play with more points. And I think startups are like that. Like if you have you're not a founder, but even if you're just in a successful one, you get to play another round in your next one. You get access to a better company and a better company with harder problems and different people. And the notion of if you play it right, you get to do multiple rounds of pinball in your startups is pretty interesting.
Thank you, Rick. I really appreciate that one. I will get that personally myself as well. Rick, I know I said one final question, but just, I guess, one more final question. 8 startups. Is this the last one?
Man, I hope so. I've been saying that for a few. I mean, they're pretty fun, right? They're pretty fun to do. They're pretty consuming, time consuming and satisfying. So the plan is to grow this one and make it pretty big. And so with a little luck, it'll be my last one, but you never know.
Well, I wish you all the luck. You're building an incredible company and it's having a lot of success, which is amazing. And I wish you all the best. And thank you so much for being on the show.
Thanks, Ross. Thanks for having me.
Thanks, Rick. This podcast was brought to you by Serana Labs and powered by Harrison Clark. At Harrison Clark, we're at the heart of Silicon Valley's evolution and at the intersection of search and venture, funding the companies shaping the future and connecting them to the most elite cloud, data, and AI talent. To learn more, visit harrisonclark.com. If today's episode challenged your thinking, then share it with someone who's driving innovation. For even more insights on achieving product market fit, subscribe to our newsletter, The PMF Playbook, where we break down the journey from zero to product market fit. Visit thepmfplaybook.com. For more episodes, follow us on social media or visit insidethesiliconmind.com. Until next time, stay curious, stay consistent, and stay inside the Silicon Mind. See you soon.